As a manager, companies are pretty good at defining, hey, this is the target, this is the outcome. The target or an outcomes comes with almost zero control or influence. The problem of 100% accountability and 0% autonomy.
Managers, especially for companies that are growing fast, tend to be a bottleneck, right? By factory setting, they're a bottleneck by default.
Good manager shouldn't be a lucky draw. It should be by design. It needs to be outcome of a good design and good systems.
Two founders walk into with Satish and Ajit. Execution is not a hustle. When you grow people, you grow everything. Two founders walk into.
Satish, do you know what is one of the first recorded instances of managers or org hierarchy?
No clue.
No clue? So,
Amaze me.
In the real world, we've always had this, right? From army to church, you've had this hierarchy system working. But in the business world, it was actually the 1850s where this railway company in the US called New York and Erie was struggling because a train would leave and then they had one track and they had no visibility after that, right? And essentially they ran into a whole bunch of problems. Trains were crashing, people were dying. And it was their superintendent, Daniel McCullum, who drew the first actually org hierarchy chart, the first one in recorded history. And what he did was in the middle of the people on ground and then top management, he put this manager layer. And it was the first time actually someone inserted this manager layer to keep almost like a router, right? Like a router to move information from here to there. And 150 years later, or 180 or however, from the 1850s till today, nothing much has changed for the manager. They are still this middle layer between client and developer, between senior management and first-time worker. We've added few more coach, a planner, all of these things we've added to the manager's role, but essentially it's the same. And today when we look at managers, one of the biggest things we find is that they were designed actually just to be this bottleneck. They were designed to be this. How fast this layer moves is how fast the org moves. And today what we're finding more than ever before is that managers, especially for companies that are growing fast, tend to be a bottleneck, right? Tend to be really, by factory setting, they're a bottleneck by default. And I think today's conversation is, how do we move that sort of manager as a bottleneck by default to design? Yeah. And that's the focus of today.
Very interesting, because what you shared brings me back to what Google went through, because they tried to remove the layer. Contrast to your story, they had this revolutionary idea saying, what happens if you remove that manager layer, right? Do we really need it? So they tried to remove all the technical managers. And very interestingly, that only lasted for a few months, because as soon as they did that, all your escalations, your budgets, your operational decisions started moving upwards to Larry Page. And then they realized that just removing the layer doesn't remove the management work, and they really needed to solve the bottleneck issue, right? And they obviously went to work with it. But I think just dialing back, what creates that bottleneck? I think that's a good one to talk about. See, when an organization or a company is small, everybody is at an arm's length with the founder. So things move fairly fast and things happen organically, right from the context. Context flows through conversations. We're on the same lunchroom or water cooler, and we have that FaceTime with the founder, senior leaders. So we are context rich, right? And when you're context rich, you're able to make wise decisions, and you know what your seniors want. So decisions also happen very quickly. And even I'm struggling at arm's length, so I can reach out and ask you, and you're able to help me decide. And again, culture also works that way. I immerse into culture by watching you as a founder or a senior leader. And so does leadership, right? I learn leadership by imitation and immersion, by hanging and saying, okay, this is how leadership works here. To put it in one sentence, your founder is not just leading the company, but he's the leadership OS, right? The operating system. But once you cross that Dunbar number of 150, 200 and exploding, you're on that growth path, that starts to break, right? And you go through these three big changes. One is the distance between the senior management and the managers and executives. you don't work with them closely.
Yeah.
So that context is gone. You're no more context rich. A lot of things are very ambiguous for you, why we do this as a company. So leading in that space becomes challenging. But it's not just the distance, but your business also has become more complex now because you have grown. So there are more customers, more products, more people, more departments. So the complexity of an organization has grown. The magnitude of decisions you have to make, processes you have to build are a lot more complex. And it requires a lot more input and output. Just to put that in Simon Sinek's words, as a what grows, the why gets lost.
Very true.
And then you have, as you have a growing company and you need a lot more people to come in, you start to hire from all places. So the diversity of thought, people are coming from different work cultures. So they bring in their own context, they bring in
baggage.
their own baggage, their values, their drama. And so you now have all these things working together. And that creates a lot of uncertainty for managers saying, okay, how do I lead here? I do not have the clarity or the context. So they become very unsure. That bottleneck starts happening. And there are two clear signs, of bottleneck. One is you will see decisions moving upwards, decisions, escalations, and people drama. They start traveling upwards.
Yeah.
There's like, okay, can I ask my senior manager to help me here? And the opposite of that also is when you think of context, culture, clarity, they stop moving downwards.
Interesting.
Because a lot gets lost in translation, right? So between this, things are moving upwards and things are not moving downwards, that creates the real choke point. And that's your bottleneck.
Yeah. And that choke point also, if you think of Goldratt, he built this framework called Theory of Constraints, right? In his book, The Goals. He talks about how in any organization, business, whatever it is, you only move as fast as your slowest point. So that choke point is not just a manager choke point, it's an org level choke point, right? So that bottleneck, if you don't solve, the ripple effect you are going to feel across the organization. Now you have these managers, and it's not just one type of manager jamming which in Bangalore we are all very used to, jamming the junction up. You've got these managers, after having worked with literally thousands of managers across India and across the world, you have these three almost stereotypical, the expert manager, right? I get in the room, I know it all, I've done this as an IC, and their job is, hey, whatever's happening, I'll answer it for you.
Yeah.
Because they have an answer. Nobody's taught them to be a coach. Nobody's taught them to step back. It's, hey, I was top of my class. As an IC, I got promoted because I was an expert, right? So you have this expert. The second one we've seen is a manager who's not a manager, but a doer. And so they say, I want to get in. If there's a problem, let me come and fix it. The Mr. Miss Fix It is very strong sometimes. That McKinsey found that managers sometimes spend less than 25% of their time. So it's only one fourth of the time they spend managing. So the other 75%, they're actually going and doing, fixing, whatever it is. So you have the expert, you have the doer, and then the third one who I think I identify with is the carer. One who is high on the people side and very high on caring for people, so it never has tough conversations. So you have the expert, the doer, the carer, and all these types of managers at that junction clogging it up, creating this bottleneck. For companies, they've got to figure out, and for organizations of leadership, how do I take this bottleneck and design my way out of it? Because it's not just one workshop, not just an upskilling piece, it's something deeper, right? So what are you seeing in that space? How are companies doing it? What are the challenges they need to fix to design this?
Yeah, of course, we need to first understand. If you want to design something, you need to understand it better.
Yeah.
And we talk to the companies all the time. If you really want to understand the bottlenecks you face, and there are three very unique bottlenecks that you're going to find in your company. And the number one is execution ownership. In all the chaos that we talked about, nobody's completely owning the execution. As a manager, you're unsure, so you're not owning it. Then as a senior manager, it's like, hey, manager should be doing, so they are not owning it. So that obviously creates a very clear choke point. So execution ownership is number one. The second one, which you already pointed to, is your people leadership.
Yeah.
If my manager's job is to be able to coach, lead, organize my people, and I'm not able to do that because I do not have the context, I do not have skills, the identity, our skills. So that leads to poor delegation, weak feedback, underdeveloped team, and that creates a lot of people issues, right from the attrition to lack of performance and XYZ. So there's a clear choke point there. And the most important one that people don't think about, or companies don't think about enough, is leadership systems. There's no consistent system to select, develop, reward your managers. So there's a leadership is very uneven in quality. Almost if getting a good manager is a lucky draw. So I think those are your 3 defined ones. And if you think about the first one, execution ownership, if you want to understand if does that exist in your organization, one exercise I recommend all the time to the senior leaders that they do is what we call leadership pie. So think about all your energy and all the time on your calendar and think of it like a pie. And if you could split it in 4 major chunks, your first is growing. As a senior manager, as a founder, a lot of your energy actually needs to go there in growing the business, right? You're growing the products, growing the clientele, growing your engine tools. First slice of the pie is growing. The second is building the organization, building the talent, building the structures and processes so that it's strong. So you have growing and you have building. And the third one is running, where a lot of times our head is stuck in
we
that,
live
right?
in that, right? That's our zone.
Day-to-day operational stuff.
Yeah.
That's where you're stuck. And the fourth one is rescuing.
Firefighting.
Yeah. So you're firefighting, handling all the people drama, escalations, right? So if you have to look at your own pie as a leader, and then you say how big these slices are, how much time and energy going into growing and building and running and rescuing. And if you're running and rescuing, bigger they are, bigger your bottleneck
more
is.
often, yeah.
So that's a very good reality check. The bigger they are, the bigger execution bottleneck you have. Yeah.
More often than not, I'm running to the rescue. So I think that's definitely, and I love that from a top down, you're seeing that. I think when we worked with even Toyota and interviewed hundreds of managers across India, one thing we heard them consistently say is, as a first-time manager, I'm nothing but a glorified IC, right? This constant thing we kept hearing, and even for mid-level, sometimes senior managers, the role, the title may have changed, but actually the work they didn't change, right? So managers would say, I'm a glorified IC, a middle manager would just say, I'm a glorified manager. And I think that's something we heard over and over, that even if I got a promotion, I got a new title, it was the same work. And in a company, I think it's good to think through that. A promotion where the work stays the same is not really a promotion. To build systems which enable that execution for people to own their own slice of the pie. One thing we found is for first-time managers and even mid-level managers, they struggle with delegation. Who do I delegate? Who owns what, right? Just a simple thing like a Raki matrix, right? Who's in charge for this, right? Whose neck is on the line for this? So those are things I feel like managers and companies need to clearly empower, train in instant way. How do I delegate? A company which I think did it very well without just, hey, here is one training, go do it. They built an entire ecosystem around it was Netflix. Reed Hastings faced it like so many different organizations do. They hit that ceiling. Suddenly things were taking ages to decide. They were really struggling to move forward at the speed they wanted to. Yeah. And he took a very different approach, if you remember. He reduced the number of approvals a manager had to give. So there was no vacation policy that a manager had to approve. People could approve their own vacation. There was no expense approvals.
Wow.
And he gave everybody one simple context or rule of thumb, which was act in Netflix best interest. So if you took leave, it was saying, are you acting in Netflix best interest? And then a lot of self-management happened in those aspects, right? Everyone said, oh, people will abuse it, but people didn't. The second thing he did was this whole concept, and you've said this word multiple times, is he gave people context and not control. He built this whole thing he said, managers, your job is not to control people working under you, is to give them as much context. What's the why? What's the why? And that's the one thing you said, hey, breaks when you build managerial level. So you said your job as a manager, as a leader, is to give people more context. The more context they have, they will make the right decisions as long as they make decisions in the best interest of Netflix, right? So I think that was one. And then every important call had one clearly named owner. Who is making the decision was taken care of. It was delegated to X and it was their job to get it done. Execution ownership, I feel like Netflix is still a great example because they moved out of this don't just please your boss, which for us, I don't know whether it's the British drilled it into us or it's our education system where we want to please the manager, want to be yes people, right? I think that's a lot of our upbringing. Yeah. But to seek to do the best in the company and to take ownership and execute it at scale. Because if we don't do that, then this whole managers to control becomes the bottleneck. Right. And just stops at so many different levels.
I love the research you pointed out to the glorified ICs and glorified managers. What we found, our biggest insight during the research we did across India was we found this chicken and egg problem. When you talk to the senior managers, they would say, hey, I'm a glorified manager because my manager is not able to handle.
So they would go down and do their work. Yeah.
So I have to do it myself. And when we spoke to the managers, they said, but we're not getting an opportunity to do it. And very interestingly, that creates this escalation loop. Managers are unsure because they've never given a chance to do it. And because they're unsure, leaders step in and solve the problem. And because the problem is solved, escalation becomes a default behavior. And then you create that escalation bottleneck. And as you correctly pointed to McKinsey's 25% or 1/4 of companies, only 1/4 of companies, they say, are able to do these delegated decisions well. That means about 75% of managers across the world are glorified managers, theoretically speaking. So it's a problem across. And if you really double click on it, what happens here, I think one of the things I usually talk about is the problem of 100% accountability and 0% autonomy. As a manager, companies are pretty good at defining, hey, this is the target, this is the outcome you need to achieve. But the target or an outcome comes with almost zero control or influence. So a lot of times you look at it, managers don't have influence on setting priorities, allocating, people, defining timelines, defining customer trade-offs. Or even performance consequences. Those controls still lie with senior managers. Then again, that creates the choke point. You want me to own the outcome, but I'm powerless to do it. If you really want to remove the choke point, which you spoke a lot about when you spoke about Netflix, is how do you empower them? And if you have to break down what empowerment looks like, there are 5 things. So number 1 is the context, which you talked about, what Netflix did. I need to ensure that as a manager, you have enough context to have the right judgment, to make decisions, to feel confident in handling a project or a team. But with confidence also, I need to have the capability. And I need to be supported by my company in building those capabilities. So context and capability will help me really be independent and drive it. But then you as senior management need to give me the autonomy. You give autonomy and then back it up by accountability. Keep me accountable. Hey, we have given you this freedom, but then you are responsible. I think that's where Netflix got it right. And the 5th one, probably the most important one according to me, is as you give context, capability, autonomy and authority, also give margin of error.
Nice.
A space where I can make mistakes. There needs to be a safety net.
Nice.
Otherwise, your sword is hanging over you saying, if you get it wrong, you're done. What am I going to do with that autonomy? So without those pieces, empowerment is incomplete. And bottleneck is unavoidable. So you got to think about that.
Love that. Execution ownership ends up being this massive bottleneck for so many companies, right? And I like what you said. It's context. The second one you mentioned was capability. One thing we've seen over and over again, and this is probably the most repeated phrase we have heard when doing needs analysis with companies, is understanding their pain points. Is said whether it's a coder or a marketer or a salesperson. And then the best performing coder and salesperson who did well because they were a good coder, we said, now you should be a manager, which is a completely different skill set. But we said, hey, because somehow you can magically code well, you must be able to be a good people manager. And what we have found is the people who get the promotion are not the ones who may be the best people manager. The second bottleneck we find is the whole people leadership skill, is that there is the horde of people being promoted, but struggling with sort of people leadership. So let's talk through people leadership. What are some of the areas?
Yeah. So obviously that's your second bottleneck is people leadership, right? Being able to lead people. And as you correctly pointed out, the whole promotion is displaced. Right? You're doing certain jobs, certain responsibilities, certain tasks, and you're doing it really well. And then you're saying you're getting promoted to do a completely different job that requires different capabilities. Research shows that about only 44% of managers receive some sort of training in making the transition.
Nice.
And as you correctly pointed out, it's a capability issue, but also it's an identity shift they have to make. So when you think about your first leg of your career as an individual contributor, a lot of your self-worth coming from accomplishing a task or a project. You do certain work, you get rewarded for it, you appreciate it, you're thriving, right? Whether you're a coder,
this is all a school and college.
You're a designer, you're like, I'm good at this. And if I do this well, I'm going to be rewarded, I'm going to thrive in my career. Now that suddenly moves. You need to go from taking ownership for a task or a project to taking ownership for people. You need to go from doing to helping other people and inspiring other people to do. From solving, which we take a lot of pride in, is enabling others to solve. So that's a major identity shift. So if you do not help people make the transition well and help them understand what does it take to be a manager, what are those capabilities that you talked about, and just referring back to Google, once they realize that you need to deal with these bottlenecks, very smartly what they did, because the size of the company, obviously, they studied about 10,000 manager data points, because their thing was to understand what makes good managers. So they took the most effective managers and they looked at what are they doing differently, why our teams are performing better under them, they're happier, and through the process they identified 7, which later became 10 behaviors. They literally codified saying, okay, if you want to be a manager, you want to get promoted to be a manager, you want to thrive as a manager, these are 10 behaviors. Behaviors because you can see those behaviors. You can identify with those behaviors. So they said, hey, these are the 10 behaviors, right? And the good thing about behaviors is they can be taught, they can be developed. That's what Google did.
I love that. I think when you think of those behaviors, some of the things we see lacking a lot of times in managers is just that shift from doer to coach, right? You can be a great player, like take cricket for an example, but then it's a whole different skill set to actually coach. And we've seen this time and time again, because it's a whole bunch of different skills, right? It's the skill of discovery. It's the skill of not giving the answer, even if you have it. It's the skill of helping them find their way. A great example of this was, I think, when Satya Nadella took over Microsoft. They had this massive know-it-all sort of culture almost. Here were the leaders. It was very popular, that meme of their CEO making fun of the iPhone when it launched, right? And to 2014, when he took over, he moved from know-it-all to learn-it-all. The second thing he did was they actually had 84 behaviors they had for all managers. Wow. And he shrunk it down. He said, there's no way anybody can
be 84
things. And he said, from mindset, he said he moved from being a know-it-all to a learn-it-all. And then he actually codified what it was to be a manager within Microsoft. He brought it down to 3 words. He said model, coach, and care. And there's so much within that, right? And management and leadership is a whole universe. But you have to say, hey, at Microsoft, this is what it was. And coaching was in the middle of it. So then empowering his team, his managers to actually, and they were a massive management layer, as you can imagine, right? Over 18,000 managers at Microsoft. But he said, hey, these 3 things are who we should be. Right, so that move from know-it-all, learn-it-all, and have clarity on this is what being a good coach is.
Nice. That kind of brings us to the third, and according to me, probably the most important one that companies need to think about in terms of bottlenecks is leadership systems. The word codified you're using, because getting a manager, good manager shouldn't be a lucky draw. It should be by design. It needs to be outcome of a good design and good systems. So the central question you want to ask is, how do we go from these accidental managers to leadership by design? And that starts with codifying.
I think one of the things we've really enjoyed designing over the last maybe 5 to 6 years is, which L&D teams now are doing across India, leadership teams are doing, is they've stopped just saying, hey, let's do a good event or a good workshop. They've started building these learning journeys, which are then transformative, not just for a first-time manager, but for a mid-level and senior managers also. And designing those, integrating them into everyday work, not just, hey, here's 3 workshops, go attend it, is something that is game-changing and is something that every organization should be thinking through. How are you constantly upskilling? Because LMSs we know are pretty much dead, right? And struggling to be used. A great example of this is, and they've integrated it beyond the workshop, is HUL. They don't call it India's CEO factory for no reason. They have integrated a program where a lot of their leaders, their managers, their upcoming sort of folks actually get to do hard real jobs. They send them to tier 1, tier 2 cities, and where they actually have to manage and lead these mini pieces, handle PLL to almost mini businesses that they're running. And that has helped them really upskill, grow, and they've mentored them, grown them from, hey, I was just an individual contributor, to someone actually who is a leader, who can then go out and then lead a department, lead a BU and all of that. So it's thinking out of the box. Hey, what are things that we are doing as an organization to give the people these skills that they today don't have?
I love that. That's very important that organizations think through what that capacity building looks like, because the standalone programs a lot of times is like almost trying to fix the hole in the bucket, the leakage, okay, put some plaster and go home. Whereas companies should be thinking about how do I actually build stronger vessels of leadership.
Nice.
And that comes from the example you gave. You not just identify the behaviors, but then you say, okay, how do I build those, capacity build those through very strong learning journeys.
Yeah.
But the other side, I feel like that's just one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is if you just do learning journeys and leave it, then people clap, go back.
Yeah.
It never gets internalized. The other side of the coin is as you do skill building, you also do embedding in those behaviors into the system. And a good leadership systems should include some of these things. Number one is a manager standard. What does it look like to be a manager? There needs to be a shared understanding, right? That's number one. And that shared understanding is used in terms of selection and promotion criteria. People, even when they're assessing, saying who is coming into my team, I know these are the behaviors I'm looking at.
Yeah.
And when I'm promoting somebody in my team, I'm saying, hey, these are the behaviors they need to have. They should be key learners of that to be able to. Then think through the whole transition support we talked about. There should be like a 90-day orientation kit that a manager goes through or has access to that helps them think deeply about those behaviors and bake those behaviors into their workings of as a manager. Even when you talk about building that capacity, is it backed by a good diagnosis? Are you diagnosing the capacity building using those behaviors? Or is it happening in isolation? Just seeing what fires are happening, so I'm going to diagnose that. No. Build people. Diagnostic tool needs to take that behaviors into account. Then your manager rhythms, whether it's one-on-ones, appraisals, check-ins, are those conversations rich with these behaviors? Are you baking these behaviors, checking these behaviors, saying, how are you doing in terms of coaching? How are you doing in terms of giving feedback? And most importantly then, is there a way to measure and reward people? Because what you reward is what is going to grow in your organization. Do these behaviors become visible in your performance reviews? That's the most important question you need to ask. The last thing is also the pipeline. The great example you gave, think through who your emerging leaders are. They need to start owning that identity. They need to start owning those behaviors. Then you're not promoting people and then wondering whether they can show these behaviors, but you're confident in promoting them because they're already showing those behaviors. And I think this is the area when it comes to embedding the kind of leadership you want into the systems. Google did really well there. They didn't just identify the behaviors and did capability building, but they really took those and built systems around it. They took those behaviors and turned it into a shared language. Google people understand what those behaviors are and why they're important. They built assessments based on that. They gave their managers specific feedback saying, hey, these are the behaviors where we would like you to get better at. And then the recognition happened because of those behaviors. So you want that leadership system to be by design. You want it to be repeatable. You want it to be consistent across the organization.
I love that. What happens when you have that leadership system? It goes beyond just a manager training or a manager upskilling.
Yeah.
It becomes almost the ethos of the organization. It becomes the shared language everyone's speaking across, because it's not just, oh, once I become a manager, now I care about these three things. It's not a magical. It's almost, this is who we are as an org.
Yeah.
And you gradually grow into more and more of this in your journey. A great example is what Ritz-Carlton did. They codified their entire exemplary customer service, their ethos, their values into something they called the gold standard. And whether you're in Tokyo to Tirunelveli, I don't know if they have someone in Tirunelveli, but wherever you are in a Ritz-Carlton corporate office to hotel floor, 15 minutes a day, everybody from CEO to doorman or doorwoman has the stand-up. And in those 15 minutes, they talk about wins, losses, and then they talk about one of the elements of their gold standard. And then they celebrate people around them who actually have lived it. So managers are part of it, everyone's part of it, but then becomes this language we talk about. And for us, when we think of our values, be the change, in this together, big audacious impact. The reason it's there on Slack, it's there when you're giving someone an affirmation. It's used in so many different ways because we want it to be that shared language. Hey, if you're part of UNI, this is what you have. Building that shared language is the almost a layer which then permeates across the org. So I love this, right? You've got execution and ownership, you've got people leadership, and then you've got building leadership systems. These three things, if companies do well, and if they're able to unblock those bottlenecks, it really helps move them forward.
Very true. And companies have to realize companies are going to grow only as fast as your managers.
100%. Yeah.
I'm sure you've heard of the book Good to Great, which we always talk about. And Jim Collins studied 1,400 companies. And out of that 1,400, he realized that there are 11 which made the leap from being good
to great.
To great, right? And he studied them outperforming the market for 15 years. And through thousands of interviews, reading their financial reports, looking at their leadership decisions in detail, studying their culture, right? He came up with a set of things saying, hey, companies which are able to do A, B, C have the best chance of going from good to great. Right. And one of the key things he talks about in the book is leaders, building great leaders. He calls it level 5 leadership.
Leaders, yeah.
And the most insightful thing about that research is that majority of those level 5 leaders are great leaders were homegrown. It's not that these companies hired some superstars from somewhere else, but they were homegrown. They rose from the ranks. They understood the company. They understood every fabric, culture of the company and what it takes to take the company from good to great. So as a company, unless you're thinking about that very consciously and building that leadership that can take you from good to great, you're just going to hit the bottlenecks and be stuck.
Yeah, I love that. These are things every founder will face in their journey as they scale. Every top management, every leadership needs to wrestle with. Execution ownership, build your people leadership strong, help them coach, help them give feedback, give them that skills, and finally build an ecosystem where managers can thrive.